Fantastic. I think we're here. My gosh, it's always a bit of an effort. Hello. Oh, great to have you on here, Lisa, and welcome everyone. It would be great if we could have some messages in the chat box just to check that everyone on Clubhouse can hear us. That would be really welcoming. And I'm so thrilled to have Lisa Brown here this morning. I mean, Lisa, this whole world of supported living, and I know you're part of it, but it does seem quite a big topic to those of us who are perhaps new to it, and I'm hoping that you're going to be able to clear those muddy waters.
I will try. There's a lot of mud.
Yeah, exactly. Well, look, brilliant. So Mobilaji has just said, they can hear us, so that's fantastic news. Okay, so it would be great, Lisa, for anyone who perhaps doesn't know you, would you like to just give a quick intro as to who you are and what you're currently doing, and then we'll go into a bit more depth a bit later.
Cool. Lovely. Thank you, Emma, for having me here. It's lovely to be here. And I haven't been on Clubhouse for years, so it's really interesting to be back and seeing that I'd kind of forgotten it existed, if I'm honest. So apologies to all of you Clubhouse people. But my profile's probably a bit out of date on here, but it's really lovely to be here. So my background was as a nurse. I was an emergency nurse and then a community nurse for a while. And I then moved to Devon. And I struggled to get part-time nursing work around my children. So I thought, what am I going to do instead? I was driving the kids around a lot. I started listening to podcasts about property investing. And I thought, maybe I could do something with this. Maybe this would work. So really kind of accidentally fell into property. Ended up buying a couple of flats that were not split properly, ended up doing a title split, which again now is a proper recognised strategy, isn't it? But at the time wasn't really, and it was just didn't really have planning for these flats. I could see there was a bit of potential. Did them up. They were beautiful heritage flats, and I thought, perfect, I'm going to be doing this forever. Beautiful cornicing and fireplaces, and this is what I'm going to do. And then just as I refinanced those and we got some money to go again, I was approached by a specialist housing association who said, looks like you're a landlord in Devon. Would you be interested in buying a bungalow for a young man with learning disabilities? And I thought, sounds really interesting. So I made contact with them, found out about it, said yes very quickly. In hindsight, maybe a little bit too soon before I really understood what I was doing. And ended up buying this property. It was a probate property. And we did up this small detached bungalow, converted it from 2 to 3 bedrooms by going into an integrated garage, like a lot of those old bungalows had. Developed this bungalow to meet this young man's needs exactly. Loved the process of doing that. Had a really amazing experience throughout the whole thing of doing it. But then when it came to the end of the property to get it refinanced, I was told this by the surveyor ruined the property. They downvalued it massively. I struggled to get insurance on the property. Everything from a financing property and a property investment point of view went wrong, really. But morally and ethically, I knew this was a great strategy. I could see this was really powerful. And I was being asked by the other providers locally, Lisa, this is brilliant. Can you do me 2 of those? We need 3 of those. And I was like, why aren't property investors doing this? Why is this being left to the big pension funds? And actually, if those guys, they do their due diligence very carefully on where they deposit their money, if they're putting it into this space, why are property investors not doing this? Why are there all these barriers with the financing and the insurance and all of those things? So I went on this kind of weird, convoluted journey to understand it properly, get my head around it all, realised and started searching all the Facebook groups I could find on, and no one was talking about supported living. And I was like, this is really weird. Why is no one talking about this? So I set up a Facebook group and, as a stake in the ground to try and go, who else is doing this? Let's bring people together. We've now got over 5,000 people in that Facebook group. It's a brilliant community of people. And we're sort of bringing people together. And I realised that there was a lot that people needed to understand about it. So that kind of morphed into Facebook Lives, which morphed into a podcast and a YouTube channel, and kind of ends up with what I'm doing now, which is helping to everyone else to understand this better, to bring providers and property investors together so we can create more homes for people who need them. Because I realised there was a lot of misunderstanding around this subject on both sides, from the providers and the property investors, and people speak very different languages. So it was about actually bringing people together to understand each other better, and improve the conversations and improve the quality of the homes that we can create, really. So
Wow.
that's in a nutshell.
And that's so lovely as well. And I really love that story, because at the moment I come from a background of serviced accommodation. So I started off with, rent to rent serviced accommodation, which was absolutely fantastic. I sold that, and then I brought back me and my business partner, we brought back an old language school and made it into a hotel. So yeah, really exciting. But there's obviously, with the serviced accommodation licensing, there is a lot of talk of potentially some of these properties taking away from homes for people. And obviously what you're doing is really encouraging people to help, those people that need places to live. So again, this is just a fantastic kind of win-win on many levels as well. So I really love that. Now, guys, I really appreciate, I see lots of us have jumped on now. This is such a great topic, and I really want to push this to as many people as we can. So please, guys, if you can ping 6 to 10 people who you think would really benefit, she said, from hearing about this, please do ping them now. We are also on Facebook live. I have no idea how to give you the link. It's still a work in progress, but we are on there somewhere in Emma Howitt Pure Abodes. And this will be on YouTube, should be by this afternoon, and we will also break it down into smaller shorts as well, so people can, if they've only got 10 minutes to listen to your lovely information, then they can take it from there. So let's kind of jump straight in, really. And I think we'll come to sort of a bit more about your background, but I think it does seem to me a very confusing market, and inherently there's lots of different words, there's clearly lots of different groups, people, governments, and then again, which I always find funny with property, then you've got everything from a huge care home down to, you've already mentioned, a couple of bedroom flats, or even a studio flat. And I know in our hotel we've started to have quite a bit of interest from people, hence why I'm trying now to find out as much as possible. We've had people saying, we'd like to buy your property, and it's kind of like, well, okay, we're open to that. But tell us a bit more, what exactly is it? So my first question to you, if I may, is what is the difference? And I think I got it, but I think it would be great for clarification. What is the difference between a care provider and a registered provider?
Okay, so there is a lot of terminology in this space, and I think people get really confused about, and it's not helped by the fact that suddenly on social media in the last year or so, everyone's talking about supported living.
They are.
And lots of people are talking about it wrongly. So they're using these terms in the wrong way. So they think that being really clever because they're using this term, but actually they're using it to refer to the wrong thing, which adds to the confusion. So everyone's going, well, I don't know what anyone's talking about.
And then they're sharing the wrong bits.
Yeah. Can I roll it back a step further and just explain what supported living is?
That would be great.
There's some confusion around that, really. And it is simply a living arrangement for a tenant with support needs. And it can be a whole range of different tenants. So we could be talking about people with complex learning disabilities, autism, complex mental health problems, people or physical disabilities, people who have support for their whole lifetime. Or it could be shorter term support needs, maybe someone who has been homeless and requires a few months of support, maybe a couple of years of support to get back up on their feet before they move on to take their own tenancy. So there's variations in that, and there's a whole range of different people and a whole range of different organisations who are looking for properties to lease. So they're not just care providers. You're talking about registered providers. There's a huge different groups of people, because if you think, a lot of the charities, a lot of the organisations who support children in care, who support teenagers leaving the care system, veterans, prisoners coming out of prison. There's a whole range of different organisations who, as part of the support and care they deliver, they need a property, they need a home for that person. So there's a really wide range of different people and different organisations who are looking for property to lease from you if you're a property investor. So a registered provider
sorry to interject. Sorry. So supported living, is that different to social housing?
So I think when you look at it, social housing is a big umbrella, and I think supported living is a small part of social housing. But commonly when we talk about social housing, we're talking about people who are needing housing from an economic reason, not because they have a support need. It's because there's an economic reason why they need to be in social housing. So when you're looking at supported living, it still falls under social housing because it's still funded by the public purse. But it's housing where someone actually needs some support alongside to maintain that tenancy. If you were just to dump that person into a property on their own, they probably wouldn't be able to cope with the tenancy on their own.
Oh, that's a really great understanding, isn't it? So one, social housing, if you look at that more along the lines of perhaps they're not able to afford it so much, they need to have that government support or wherever it is, whereas what the supported living comes up to is, of course, they're going to need some financial help, but you also need somebody there physically helping support them in their day-to-day living as well, potentially.
That's right. Yeah, absolutely. Yeah.
Okay,
fantastic. So going to your first question about a registered provider. So generally, when you're using the term registered provider, it actually means a registered housing association in England is called a registered provider. It's a registered provider of housing. It means they're regulated by the regulator of social housing in England. And so when people are talking about registered providers, they'll commonly get them confused and talk about all kinds of people under that umbrella. But really, the definition of a registered provider is a registered housing association. There are lots of housing associations that aren't registered as well. But an RP, a registered provider, is generally a housing association that is registered.
Okay, so a care provider, would they be the people that work for the registered?
No, so quite often care providers are separate to the registered providers, and they'll be the organisations that are providing care to the tenants in the property. So we're getting quite complicated quite quickly, but depending on the needs of the tenants in the property, they may require care, and that's defined as personal care. So that's washing, dressing, toileting would be called care. So if you're a care provider, you're actually providing some element of regulated care where you're washing, dressing, toileting. That would mean that you would need to be registered by the CQC. And then you have support providers who maybe are helping people fill in benefits forms, taking people to register with a GP, those kind of things. That's not, they would generally be called a support provider rather than a care provider.
Okay, so that's, okay.
You've gone straight to some quite complicated questions around it.
Yeah.
And I think the thing is, you can get bogged down into all this terminology as a property investor. Essentially, what you're looking for is you're looking for an organisation to lease your property. You don't need to be at this point, when we're talking at really high levels, you need to be thinking about why you might want to do that rather than understanding the nuts and bolts of it. Once you start getting deeper into it and thinking, yes, I want to do this as a strategy, I want to lease my property to these guys, then you need to make sure you really understand who you're leasing a property to so you can do proper due diligence on them. But if you're coming to this and you're listening to me today for the first time, you've heard me talk about this, I don't want you to be thinking, oh my God, there's too many words. I don't like this. I'm going to run away and hide. It's not that complicated at this level. You just need to begin to understand. When I first started talking about this quite a few years ago, everyone was told on all the training courses, you want to let your property to young professionals or families who are going to be there forever. And that's who you want to let your properties to. No one was taught about supported living. But a few people were talking about social housing, but generally it was like, oh, we don't really want to do that. Nowadays, it's kind of switched and gone full circle and people are going, oh, this is a really good idea. And that's brilliant, because that's what I wanted when I started talking about it, was people to be excited about it and see it as a great way to invest in property and see actually that leasing your property to one of these organisations who might lease your property for 5 years, for 7 years, they're going to take that property from you. In that time, you're not going to be responsible for any voids. They're going to lease your property along the lines of a commercial lease. And so actually, they'll often take over wear and tear management of the property. They'll often take over bills. So if you're an HMO landlord, that's really appealing at the moment, particularly with the spikes in utility costs we've seen, as well as the kind of like the pain of managing properties. Even if you've got a good letting agent, actually, you're still having to authorise those repairs and actually, no, let's go with someone else or let's get another quote on that. All of those things takes time. And actually, if you're handing a property over to a good quality organisation who are going to look after your property, it does take a lot of time away, as well as often ending up being net better off each month. And that's the thing you need to kind of be aware of, as well as this amazing thing that you're doing all of this, you're potentially making a little bit more money each month, and you're making a big difference to the society and your community. That's really powerful, isn't it?
I think definitely. Well, for me, certainly, that's something that from a mindset perspective, I work on my mindset a lot, and certainly I love working with Bob Proctor, and all of these kind of Think and Grow Rich, and a big thing, isn't it, is giving back. I suppose we call it karma as well, isn't it? The more you give, you might not get it back from the same place. And absolutely knowing that your property is potentially helping these people that really are potentially, either in a short-term dilemma and need that kind of help and support to get through, or have genuine long-term issues that requires this support. And if you can help them, I think that's absolutely amazing. So if we kind of take a step and kind of look at it, because again, it was one of the things with property that I just found so overwhelming for such a long time, thinking of property as a business, because there's just so many different bits, isn't there? There's so many different types of property. There's different strategies that you can do. There's different ways of funding it. I mean, it seemed like not really a rinse and repeat model for me. So if we're going to sort of take a few steps back, so for instance, do you believe that there's a certain type of property? So if we're just to start at the property, I don't know if that's the right place to start, but say for instance, for me, I've just got a buy to let that we're just refurbing at the moment, 2 up, 2 down, in a sort of a small town, and then we've got a hotel. Is that they seem so extreme in what they are physically? Is that still something that you would be talking to potentially very different providers? Or might it be, one provider really likes these kind of terraced houses and another provider wants, this multiple unit? So where would you kind of start? Do you start with the property or do you start somewhere else? Is that chicken and egg?
It is real chicken and egg question, that about whether you start with the property or the provider. Both ideally, really. But I think and it depends where you are. If you've got a property, then you use that property and use that to approach providers and see. There isn't one type of property that is the property for supported living. And I think the one that everyone assumes is right for supported living is large HMOs. I seem to have an awful lot of inbox messages. Oh, I've got this 30-bed HMO. It's perfect for supported living. Anyone who's managed an HMO will know that you get compatibility issues and you get challenges with standard tenants. So if you have tenants with support needs, those compatibility issues are only going to be amplified. So I would question any provider who was looking to take a property that was that large about whether they could actually manage that and they weren't actually going to cause a great big issue for the community. And you'd find that actually they'd somehow exercise a break clause and your property be handed back to you. So I think, generally you're looking at, I have providers who want everything from 1-bed flats, 2-bed flats, small houses like you talk about, 2-bed houses, 3, 4, 5-bed houses, family homes. They're very popular for children's homes, so sort of detached family homes or semi-detached homes, right up to blocks of flats are more popular than the large HMOs. So your hotel in its current format, if it's in a kind of hotel format, is probably of less interest to a lot of providers.
So ours is they're all individual studio flats, so they've all got a kitchenette, so they're actually it's like a block of studio flats.
So you might well find providers who are interested in that, absolutely. A lot of the long-term providers where you get the high quality covenants for the leases are looking for full 1-bedroom flat sizes, so sort of minimum 37 metres squared size flats. So they're looking for slightly bigger than those, but there are organisations who will take those small studios as well. So there's not a simple answer in that way. You can see there's a range of different properties that are needed for different organisations.
Okay. So what would you advise somebody? So let's say, I'm literally, which is not far off, to be perfectly honest. Let's say, I'm really starting out and I've got I'm a landlord, I've got a couple of properties and I'm suddenly thinking, well, actually, I'd been thinking maybe doing service accommodation. Now everyone's talking about supported living. what would you recommend is the first steps now? And obviously feel free, I know you've got a fantastic platform, so don't feel like you have to say, oh well, I know what you provide. You've been highly recommended by a number of people, which is why I wanted to speak to you, to somebody who who's come from also a background which is so nice, as somebody who probably understands a little bit more about what's happening on the front line as well. So I always think that that's really genuine as well. So yeah, where would you direct them? What would you advise them to do?
So I think if you're in that position, you've got a couple of properties and you're kind of like, what do I do? Explore what the demand is and what the need is in the area that these properties are in. I have got a guide on my website, a free guide you can download, which talks through steps that you can go through to find providers. There's 2 guides on there. One is for providers, which helps them find property investors, because you'll be surprised to know that providers also really struggle to find properties and find you guys. So so you want to make sure you download the guide to find providers, not to find property, because that's for the providers. So download that free guide, and that goes through some of the steps. It talks about sort of Google search terms, websites that you can find providers in, things like that. So that's all there for you. I have set up something called the Supported Living Property Network, which is a community of providers and property investors. And what we do is, so within that community, you can go, I've got this 2-bed house here, is anyone interested in it? And you might find that some of our providers are interested. And there's no further fees. You just pay to join. It's a monthly fee. You can leave anytime. I'm not interested in tying people into knots. And there's no kind of expensive sourcing and introductory fees, which there's a lot of around suddenly. And there are a lot of people out there going, oh, yes, I found you a supported living provider. I'll charge you $8,000 or something for it. Completely nonsensical for a tiny little studio flat. There's a lot of really bonkers stuff going on at the moment. So just be careful who you're using. But I think the key thing is that, within the network, we also do a lot of education. And what I think I said at the beginning is, what I realized was lots of property investors don't understand this space. So I get messages from people going, oh, I just found a provider and I signed a lease, didn't really know what I was doing. And now look what trouble I've ended up in, because actually I've ended up with this situation, or this has gone wrong, or this has happened. So as part of the network, there's a whole load of training for property investors, but equally training for providers. Because what I was finding was I was being approached by supported living providers who were saying, oh, I signed this lease on a property that I thought was perfect, but then actually I can't get any referrals into this property because I hadn't really thought it's on a main road, and the people, my tenant group, can't be on a main road. There's 2 different ways of thinking about things. So we do have access to a whole load of training within that, and we bring in guest speakers, but we also have a really supportive community. So actually it's somewhere to go when you're like, not sure, what to do with this, or how do I approach this? We've got a whole load of experts and support within there for people. So, yeah.
Amazing. And I put the link, guys, and it is a very simple one. It's just www.lisabrown.uk. So everyone can jump on that. So kind of moving on a bit further, you've already sort of raised a couple of points here. So, so they can come to you, they can, if they want to do some training, they can go and fill out the free guide. I find it really interesting as well that you have providers that seem to be struggling, because you hear so many people. And in fairness, we have been, for probably couple of months now, really sort of looking at a lot more just to understand this market. And it just does not seem that straightforward. And there just seems to be a whole host of kind of different groups. So the first thing we did, and I don't know if this is typical, but we went to the local council, and I never received a response so quickly from the council. I mean, normally it takes months, doesn't it? I literally wrote an email saying, we're local investors. It's quite a well-known hotel. We've just developed this. We're now looking to purchase some more properties, but we'd like to know what you need, because if there's a specific need, we would like to fulfill that for you. Anyway, boom, honestly, it was about 4 minutes. I got a call. I couldn't believe it. But on top of that, it really seemed to be what I would call just normal, what you have touched on as social housing. So more this economic side of things. Yeah. And I really I kept saying we really want to help, people with kind of more needs than that, and that didn't seem to filter down. So and then you've got, you hear about there's government bodies, and then there's local council bodies, and then you've got these registered providers. Where do they all fit and knit together?
So it's quite complicated, and I spent probably about an hour explaining how all of that fits together. So it's probably a bit much to kind of do. But I think the key thing from my point of view is, where you approach the council, they're probably thinking about it from a social housing perspective, and they're crying out for social housing homes at the moment. So there is a real need for that. The problem is what they're expecting you to do as a landlord there is generally take an AST with a tenant who probably has some vulnerability there as well, and probably has some support needs thrown in. And you're taking quite a gamble quite often on that. And you're taking very low rents because they can only pay you LHA rates. And currently LHA rates in most areas have fallen so far behind market rent, it makes it almost impossible for people to let properties. So when you're looking at supported living, you're generally getting higher than LHA rates. So, and you're generally getting an organisation who's signing that lease, not that tenant in the property. That's what makes it much more appealing as a property investor and protects you a little bit if you've done your due diligence on that organisation. So the council, there'll be commissioners within the local authority who are the decision makers around a lot of the supported living stuff. But and some people will say you should be approaching commissioners, but I know a lot of commissioners, I know how busy they are. They don't have time to pick up the phone to you. Very rarely. In some areas, they're a bit more open to property investors, but in a lot of areas, you won't get the phone returned. You'll never get a call back. I think you're better, which is what I talk about in the free guide I've got. I think you're much better going and finding the care providers, the support providers, the charities, the people who are on the ground supporting people. They know what they need. They know the area really well. So they'll go, oh, do you know what? We've got this house in this postcode and we could do with another 2 houses there. They know what they need in that area. They've spent a long time building the relationships with the commissioners. If you're bringing them the properties, they'll introduce you to the decision makers if they need to. Or maybe they don't need to. Maybe they've already got the referrals waiting. A lot of the providers I work with have a long list of referrals. They're waiting to fill these properties and they can't fill them. So, they're looking for properties and looking to find things. So I don't think the local authority is always the right place to start as a property investor, unless you're looking at doing that social housing model, which, like I said, there's huge need for. But I think if you're looking for a supported living model, I would be looking for the organisations in your communities who are there doing the support, who are delivering the support and know what's needed.
So it sounds like, so coming from a serviced accommodation background, and, I'm a huge advocate of due diligence. And one of the things that I'm just huge on is your area. I call it your goldmine area, because inherently what people do is they tend to go, oh, there's a big need in, I don't know, Bournemouth, huge need, but actually they haven't quite checked if there's less, if there's enough demand to cover what's already there. And so there becomes a lot of, over subscribing, basically, I suppose, in those areas. Do you think that there's a need across the board? Or is it very much, the normal route that inherently you must understand what is the need in that area and whether it's, that area actually is a fit for this need?
I think that's where I think building relationships with the providers is really powerful, because they'll tell you what they need and what they don't need, and which areas they're saturated in, or which areas they're not getting referrals at the moment, or there's no money in that budget, so I can't do anything in that area. So again, I think it comes back to relationship building and taking the time to do that, and that then feeds into that due diligence. There is need for supported living properties across the whole country. If you're in Wales and Scotland, the system's slightly different, and it's slightly different, but there is still demand, but it's a little bit more complicated. But if you're in England, there is demand, but it's going to be higher in higher population areas. Saying that, there are still needs in some rural communities, but more you'll see there's higher demand in towns and cities than there is in some of the tiny villages and things. But again, it's building those relationships with the providers so they can tell you what they need. And then your ideal situation is building relationships with providers, being able to go out and help them find the properties that they need, building those relationships, I have now, where they're like, this is what we need now, and we go out and we take them on viewings with us, and we work out how we can, find properties for individuals is generally what we're doing. This person, I like to do the very complex, more complicated learning disabilities. So it's like, this is this person, they're currently stuck in long-term hospital. We need to get them out. They need this kind of spec property, and then we go and find a property for that person.
Amazing. So you sort of touched on, we've already sort of touched on funding, we've touched on LHA rates. Now, from what I understand, that with supported living, it tends to be much more than your average rent, so potentially higher than LHA, and you hear some crazy figures bandied around. Especially, I know a chap in London, I can't even say what he's being paid. It's absolutely staggering, and actually, in fairness, quite disgusting that somebody is being paid so much money. It just and then it was double paid because the tenant decided not to move. So going to that, what is an expectation of this? And also, I understand that there are different pots. That's what I hear. You've got a government pot, which supposedly is kind of got an empty bottom. It's like a bottomless pit of money. And then you've perhaps got a local pot that, they've got restrictions on what they can spend. So what would people expect to be, paid for this kind of properties?
I think if you set your expectation around market rent, I think that's a fair place to be. You do sometimes get enhanced housing, that's funded by enhanced housing benefit. You sometimes get slightly above market rate, but there has to be justification for that. Those days of those really excessive rents that you'll hear people talking about in the pub, oh yeah, I get £1 million a week for this grotty HMO in the back of Birmingham. Really, they're not happening anymore. They're not being agreed by providers anymore. If you're getting providers who are offering you those rates and saying they're going to sign very long leases with them, I would be hugely suspicious, because I don't think that they're going to be around for a long time, and they probably won't be around for the length of your lease. The government is cracking down heavily on the very excessive rents and the bad practice that's gone on in this sector. And like you say, it's kind of a bit indecent, really, isn't it? It shouldn't be very, very high rents. We're all funding that from the public purse, from what we're paying in tax. It shouldn't be that we're paying stupidly high rates for properties. We do need to pay higher rates sometimes, but it needs to be justified. So it needs to be the fact that actually someone has very complex needs and needs to be in a detached bungalow away from other individuals, then perhaps actually they do need to pay higher than a normal 3-bed house rate for that person, because actually what you're doing is buying a £500,000 bungalow in the middle of nowhere for them. That's expensive. So there needs to be, and it still works out cheaper than that person being in hospital, paying for those complex properties to be adapted for somebody. If you're looking at your standard properties, like your 2-bed terrace house you were talking about, your standard sort of fairly standard rental properties, you need to set your expectation around market rent. Saying that, if someone offers you LHA rates, but it's on a 5-year lease, don't discount it. Sit down and actually work out, what would your costs be on managing that property for 5 years? What would you actually get net in your pocket? And be realistic about the voids. Even while the market's as hot as it is now, the chances are property's going to be empty for 3 weeks. We always used to say 5 or 6 weeks, didn't we? But even if we just say 3 weeks between tenants, and then you've got to pay referencing, and you've got to do that little bit of a paint job and replace that bit of carpet there before new tenants move in, pretty soon on a standard buy-to-let, that's eaten your profits up for the year, the way the interest rates are at the moment. So you can see how actually accepting LHA rates, although it might be less than you think you want, when you work it out over 5 years, and you're going to get that money every month because you've done your due diligence and you're convinced that they're a good provider and they're going to work with you, then actually you might find that you're net better off even on LHA rates.
Yeah, I like that. And in fact, I've got something, I call it the guaranteed rent spreadsheet model. But I think that has been kind of taken into different things, but inherently it's just that it looks at the net that a landlord is going to get compared to with all of those expenses, and actually what would they get, and you could actually get, and quite often it's hundreds of pounds less, or hundreds of pounds less, and it's kind of like, wow. But because you get, like, let's say you know the rent is £1,600, you kind of have that in your head. So if it's suddenly 1,200, they'll be like, oh no. But when you net it all down, actually you could be better off without all the hassles.
Yeah,
so
absolutely.
Going on to kind of what I feel is something that definitely holds people back, landlords, is if they are getting the and inherently, you know, we're all there, aren't we, to feed our families. So, you know, we can be socially responsible, but at the same time we must fill our own cup up first and make sure that we're providing for our families first. So with this looking at, let's say, a normal rent, the fear is that you're going to give your property out to, you know, vulnerable people who might be a little bit off the wall and might really damage your property. So you think, okay, so I'll have made this amount of money, a little bit extra, but at the end of it, they just go out of business or they do this, and then I'm left with a really, you know, property that's now pretty damaged, and all that profit I'm now just spending in bringing it back up to a rentable level. So where are we at on that kind of side of things?
So it comes down to the wording in your lease, doesn't it, to make sure that actually your lease means that your property will be handed to you in the condition that you do it. There are quite a few leases out there that are very onerous on the landlord, and there's quite a few organisations who are leasing property at scale, but when you look at the wording within it, there's a lot of obligations on the landlord, and actually it ends up being very heavy on you. So I think it's about making sure that actually your property will be returned to you in the condition you hand it over to, and that's what is worded within the lease. But as you rightly say, that organisation, if it was to go bust, where do you stand then? So it's about doing proper due diligence on that provider, and that's where understanding the system properly, so that you know what you're doing when you're handing that property over. You actually have done all of this due diligence on the providers, so you know who you're working with, you understand the system, and you understand how to check them out. And that's something that I do teach, because I feel like it's something people really need to know. They need to know how to talk to providers and ask these questions and get a sense of, actually, is this an organisation that is going to be here in a few years' time when I want my property back, or, you know, and how are they going to do it? Yeah. But saying that, I wouldn't be scared of tenants who do damage properties. A lot of the properties I hand over are handed over to people who are going to damage properties. I know that. I get phone calls from providers regularly going, Lisa, just to let you know, we've had 5 doors broken, 2 windows, we're replacing them all, but just wanted to let you know that's what's happening, just in case you drive past. I know that's what's happening. I work with really good providers who make sure that's repaired super quickly, so those tenants aren't exposed to it. But they'd like, just wanted you to know in case you drove past and saw the van there, that's what's going on, you know. So I much prefer that phone call than the phone calls from my private tenant letting agents going, oh, Lisa, there's, you know, a drain is blocked again, or something that, you know. Yeah. So yeah, I wouldn't be scared of the damage side of things, and not all tenants are going to damage properties. As I said, I tend to let to some of the highest needs because no one else will touch them, and that I'm a soft touch perhaps, but it's the thing that I'm really passionate about. And so I will let properties to people who I know have much higher needs and are more prone to breaking properties, if you like. But that's not everybody. We're talking about a whole range of different organisations. If you're letting your house to a group of veterans perhaps, or children in the care system, you know, there's so many organisations, women fleeing domestic abuse. There are so many organisations who need properties, your property will be maintained beautifully, you know. And it's always a risk in the private rental sector, isn't it? You can do as much, you know, you let out a property to someone, you can still get your property trashed when you get it handed back. So it's not a risk that you don't have in the private rental sector.
Yeah, interesting. And do you think in this area it is worth kind of niching? So you just mentioned, you know, a number of things like, you know, children, and it may be younger children, I presume, obviously, you know, women fleeing domestic violence, it might be veterans. Is it worth and then you mentioned maybe these higher risk of damage people. Is it worth kind of niching? Is that an option? Do most of these providers provide for very specialists, you know, do only you know, women fleeing domestic abuse, are they just in one provider, or do they tend to be generalists?
A lot of the very good providers will be quite niched. You know, if you're an expert at supporting people with complex learning disabilities, that's very, very specialist. So your staff team and your whole management and stuff are going to do that. They may have several different strands to their support organisations. They maybe have different strands that do that. But a lot of the small, you know, a lot of the really good organisations might be quite small. It might be the local domestic abuse charity in your town, you know, that might be as small as that, or in your region, you know, are looking for property. So quite often it is specialised, and the different providers will work within them. And I think it's about following something. If you feel passionately about something, I think it makes it easier, that drive and that really wanting to get involved and to find the providers and to work with them and stuff. I think it really helps if you do have a particular passion for that and that's what you want to do. But a lot of the property investors I work with don't. They see this as an economic reason. They can see that actually it saves them a lot of time. They want to hand over a property to a provider. That's what they want to be able to do. So they don't really care who goes into that property, and that's equally fine. I mean, you don't have to be in this for whatever reason it is that works for you, as long as you're handing over good quality properties. You know, so a lot of the people I work with will be just like, actually work with a range of different organisations, whoever needs properties in their area, and the numbers stack for them, then that works for them.
Wow. Okay, I like that. And so just going back to where we started, Rob, when we spoke about care providers, registered providers. So it sounds like you don't specifically say, oh, you can only go with a registered provider or only a care provider. If I'm just clarifying it, it sounds like it really is all about that due diligence around that provider, and also building these relationships so that you really understand. Am I kind of hearing that correctly?
Yeah, absolutely. There are really good registered providers, and there's registered providers you maybe wouldn't want to work with. There's really good support providers and care providers, and there's care providers and support providers you maybe wouldn't want to work with, you know. So it's about, yeah, absolutely understanding who they are and doing due diligence on them so that you know who it is.
Okay, fantastic. Then you also, right at the beginning, brought up this thing about funding. And let's be fair, most of us who are property investors, we don't just, you know, want to buy one house and that's it. And inherently, that's hardly going to fund your retirement. So inherently, most people are going to be wanting to, if they have a little bit of education, potentially going to want to buy, add a bit of value, and pull out some money so that they can then go and rinse and repeat, so to speak. You did mention this kind of funding issue that you had, and this kind of down valuing, and there does seem to be limited markets potentially for this. Is this correct, or where are we now?
Than it was. But it's still a frustration of mine that it's not big enough, and it should be bigger. So I actively campaign to try and get more mortgage products out there. It's part of the thing, one of the things we do in the network. And we've actually got a few people who we're talking with at the moment about developing products for us, which is quite exciting. But at the moment, you can't use a standard buy-to-let mortgage because they won't touch the fact that there's a lease there rather than an AST, and they don't like the fact that the tenants in the property are what they class as vulnerable tenants. I personally think that's a discriminatory term, and I don't think they could actually discriminate if we actually took it to a court case about it.
That's true, actually, isn't it? When I thought of that.
Yeah, when I grow a third arm or give up sleep or something, I'll sort that one out. But yeah, we basically need to, you know, it is frustrating that they won't. So you do have to go for specialist products, and there are a limited pool of them out there. And again, there's a lot of brokers out there who say they understand supported living and are not. And we're seeing actually the downside of more people talking about this is that some of the existing lenders are pulling out of the space a little bit because people have been dishonest with them and don't understand it and are putting forward properties that aren't suitable. So it's a complicated thing. Getting the financing right is complicated. It's not impossible at all. There are products out there, and there are more products out there than there have ever been. So we're definitely making progress, but it's not as fast as I would like, frustratingly. But don't let that put you off entirely. You just need to go into it with your eyes open and know that you're working with a broker who does understand this and can put your case forward and can get you the products you need. And, you know, we've got brokers who can work with.
Oh, great. So you recommend some?
Yeah. Within the network, we've got brokers who come in and regularly do training and work alongside us to make sure we get and you know, get us directly to underwriters where we need to. So yeah.
Amazing. I love that. And how incredible to be in a do you have to pinch yourself? Because that's really amazing. You just said I actively campaign to get more products on the market. I mean, that's a huge thing to go from, you know, moving home and not being able to find, you know, enough nursing work, to now you're actively doing something quite revolutionary and changing the path of things. How does that feel? That's amazing, Lisa.
I just feel like I'm so lucky to do the job that I do, and I feel like this is. And also, I think coming from a nursing background where, you know, anyone who's nursed or worked in the NHS, you know, a 12-hour shift is a slog. You're working really, really hard. People go, God, Lisa, you work really hard. I'm like, I do not. I'm not running in any department. I really do not work hard at the moment. I do. I put in a lot of hours, and I probably do compared to other people. But it's just funny. When people are like, God, you work really hard. Really, I'm not running a department right now. So, yeah, I love what I do. I really do. I feel incredibly privileged. And I feel incredibly privileged that people trust me, and I get a lot of people come to me with challenges. Lots of the providers come to me with, you know, really difficult situations, and actually being able to problem solve and find the right person to introduce them to is brilliant. It's a complete honour. And seeing the impact of that, and seeing the fact that we're creating homes for people who have been stuck in hospital or can't get out of their homes because they're in an inappropriate home, there is nothing that beats that. So it's really powerful.
Oh, I really love that. It's quite a tremendous feat, and I really, congratulate you on that, because that's, you know, not a path that necessarily everyone's going to have gone down. And I believe that, I feel really fortunate as well to spend my time, be paid to talk about property. I mean, I just love that. I do that anyway. It's like a result. I really enjoy that. So I think that's a great one. Okay, so I know we're coming to an end. So if you've got any questions, guys, you better ask them quick now. But planning use class. So obviously that is and potentially a changing model at the moment with things coming in and out, especially we've just had the levelling up thing coming out. Where are we at with that? Do we have to have it changed? Can it be in HMOs? Can it be in a hotel? Can it be in a C3 residential? I imagine it depends. But where are we at with that?
So a lot of it is done under C3 use class, so residential use class. So a lot of the time you don't need to change. If you've got a standard property, you don't need to change the use class. It's still somebody's home first and foremost. A lot of planners don't understand supported living. A lot of planning consultants don't understand supported living. So there's a lot of confusion around that. And again, it's something that we work within the network to help everyone understand that, because people get wrongly told they need to change the use class, and they don't always. If it's an HMO and it meets the HMO classification, just because there's supported living tenants in there, it still generally needs to be an HMO. In some situations, some organisations leasing, you might not need to, but generally just think it's simpler if you do keep it as that use class. There is a separate use class, C3B, which is for supported living. That can be used sometimes to your advantage as a property investor. If you're doing an HMO in an Article 4 area, you can sometimes get to C3B slightly simply. And that can work for you if you're looking to adapt a property. And some properties need to be C2, like a children's home will always need to, under 16s children's home will always need to be C2. Ofsted require them to be C2. Some areas we're seeing a little bit of lux on that, but generally most areas C2. So that is a change of use class if you're doing under 16s. I don't think you could carry on with a hotel use class. I think you may need to change that, because I think it's someone's long-term home. So I think that probably would need to be a change of use class there. But again, it's worth having a conversation with the local authority and seeing how they view it.
Amazing. And so for you, so obviously, you know, you had a move, a complete kind of life change. Can you just talk us through a bit of your journey? How I know you explained how you started, and you bought a property, and you probably, as you said, you made a few errors, well, not errors, some learnings that happened. So where has that kind of progressed, and where are you now?
So I guess I then got planning on a large building. COVID struck, so the people who follow me will have had the saga of my social club saga. So I got planning on it eventually. It was a great big thing, but we ended up with a lot of vandalism and a lot of challenges on that. So I learned a huge amount about that and getting planning. And then actually I was approached by a housing association who wanted to buy it, and my plan had been to develop it and hold it. But the numbers at the time were looking a bit concerning around whether, development wise, was it going to end up costing us more, you know, with everything? And then this housing association were offering to buy it outright, and I would make quite a nice profit on just selling it on. So I sold that on with planning, with a lease and an end use on it, and that opened up another opportunity to be like, oh, that's a good way to do things, is, you know, getting that planning and sort of flipping it to the right provider who would develop it out for the use. So that's, you know, and now I'm at a point where we're looking at buying a whole load of small bungalows for people with complex needs, and looking at how we scale that, working with investors, and how do we safely do that. The challenges we have, you know, and I'm really open about this, the types of properties we need are not cheap properties, and they're not the sort of properties you pick up super cheap at auctions or anywhere, because there's always going to be a builder who can do something with a bungalow. So it's about trying to work out how we get the funding stack, and that's what I'm exploring at the moment, and just getting my head around that, to work out how we can do that at scale in the next sort of 12 months, because there's a huge demand for these more expensive bungalows. And they're really needed. And like I said, there's probably ways I could make more money more quickly, but that's not necessarily my driver. So it's like, how do we do this? Working with investors who perhaps are happy to sit into a deal for a longer term and sit into that deal, and so that we can then buy some of these properties that are needed for people with more complex needs, who we need to get out of hospitals and get into safe homes in their communities, near their family and friends. So that's what I'm looking at doing now, is what's the best vehicle to do that, and the safest way from an investment point of view to scale that up.
Amazing. Oh, what an incredible journey. I love it. We've got a couple of questions, so let's get those done. So Yuri has said, does leasing to a registered care provider make it commercial, potentially change to C2, and then can a pension fund purchase it?
A pension fund can purchase it in C3. There doesn't need to be C2 for a pension fund to purchase it. It's still residential use class if it's somebody's home. Sometimes it needs to be C2, but not always. A lot of the time it isn't C2. So, and there's a lot of confusion around that. A lot of local planners think it needs to be C2, but it doesn't. It's separate. It's someone's home. It's not a care home. And supported living is different from a care home, Yuri. So it's just, helping them to understand why it's different. Sometimes it can work in your favour to put it to C2. And if you're flipping it to a fund, then perhaps the fund would be happy with it being C2 too. I think if you're retaining that property, I would probably want to fight to keep it C3, just because if at the end of that lease the provider doesn't want it, you can then repurpose it into standard rental and you've got an exit there. But it depends what you want to do with it. Hope that helps.
Yeah, but do you see, so going back to just confirming, with that lease in place, do you see that then becomes an option to, rather than have a bricks and mortar valuation, you can then create a commercial valuation on it?
It depends on the size of the property. So if it's an HMO over 6 beds, you can generally try and argue for a bit of an uplift on that. And if it's a block of flats, then, again, a large, mid to large size block of flats, you might be able to get commercial valuations on it. It depends on the lease covenant, who's leasing it, and how strong the person leasing it is as well. There's a lot that comes into it. I wouldn't count on it always being able to get that commercial uplift on the valuation of your lease. I would, be looking at it at bricks and mortar, probably more realistically. But it depends on where in the country it is and what the lease is like, and how strong it is.
So it sounds like, just like any normal, when you're looking at any kind of commercial funding, if it's kind of residential, that's what it is. It's bricks and mortar, no matter who's leasing it, so to speak. Okay, fantastic. So Mobilaji has said, what happens if for some reason you want to use the property or sell on as a property investor?
What if you want to reclaim the property and get
Sounds like
it out? Do you think that is? Yeah, depends what's in your lease wording. I would suggest you go into this expecting this to be a long-term arrangement. That's what the providers are going to do, due diligence on you. Any good provider is going to check you out too, and they're going to be asking, are you going to want this property back? And if you're like, well, I might want to move my son into it at some point, then they might not lease it from you. If they're looking at long-term care for somebody, they want a home for life for this person. They settle someone in. They don't really want you to be reclaiming it. Now, obviously things happen in people's lives, and sometimes things do go wrong and you need to take a property back. So it depends on what the wording is within the lease, and when the break clauses are, and what the trigger is for you to exercise those break clauses so that you could reclaim it. So it depends. Again, I'm sorry, it's not a yes and no answer to anything in this.
Oh, I love it. And then Craig, hi Craig, has just said, C3B, up to 6 people living together as a single household and receiving care, e.g. supported housing schemes such as those for people with learning disabilities or mental health problems. Thanks for that share, Craig. We really appreciate that. Wow, I mean, just a huge topic, and I think you've really helped, certainly me, to really start to kind of unravel it. And it definitely sounds like, you know, your community, the Supported Living Property Network, is a place to be learning, and to learn from clearly somebody who's literally doing it on the ground. So could you just tell us a little bit more about, you know, I presume obviously we've got the website. I presume it's the Supported Living Property Network is also a Facebook group. Tell us what you offer and how people can work with you.
So I've got a free Facebook group, which is just Supported Living Property with Lisa. On my website, there's a whole load of free resources. So there's podcasts and YouTube videos and blog articles and the guides that you can download to help you find providers. And then I offer the network as well. And the network is £45 a month currently. And that's a way for you to connect with a community of providers and property investors, access a whole load of training. We do networking events, and there's no additional fees, no introductory fees, legal tie-ins, anything like that. You just come in and build relationships directly with the providers within the network. And then also, if you're looking to learn more about this, I offer some training. I have the Supported Living Property Academy, and I have some training courses to really help you, because I found that people would do some training and then they needed actually a bit more hand holding, because they'd do the training, brilliant, I understand it now, Lisa, go out, start talking to providers, and then go, oh, I've just had this conversation, I don't know what this means, how do I do this? So we set up the academy, and we've got a really fab group of small group of property investors all supporting each other and really going places with this strategy. So depending on what you're looking to achieve, we've got kind of a range of different options. So yeah, please do just get in touch, download the guide and have a look on the website. There's a whole load of information there for you.
Oh, well, that's incredible. No, I'm the same. And in fact, one of the things I do is I help rent to rent people, rather than paying the sourcing fee. I find them the property, and then they basically are paying for me to mentor them, because it's exactly that, isn't it? When you're doing things on the ground, there's only so much a course can answer. It literally, there'll be something that crops up, and having that community that you've created there just absolutely answers those needs of kind of like, I don't really know, they've said this, or I'm doing that.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think it's, you know, no matter how experienced you are, actually you always need someone else that you can ask, don't you? So yeah, absolutely, it's a great offering that you have there, Emma. I think it's brilliant.
That's kind. Well, Lisa, thank you. I really appreciate you coming and taking time out and sharing what you do, because I know for a lot of people this is just such a massive thing that they really want to get into. So at least now they've got a bit of a route to get there, and really follow that up. So just a reminder, guys, this is going to be later on this afternoon uploaded onto YouTube. We've obviously been on Facebook as well. It will be there will be a recording of this on Clubhouse as well, if you wanted to pop back and re-listen. So there's lots of places where you can find that, so that's really great. And next week, because this is such a huge topic, I've got a few more people who are actually doing this supported living with their properties, and we're going to be listening about their journey, how they found it, what they're doing, and these are kind of people that are a bit newer to it. I know one of them definitely works with you, Lisa, so it'd be great to hear her feedback, and I can see she's absolutely doing some incredible stuff there as well. So that'll be a really nice one to listen to those guys next week as well. So yeah, do you have just like a closing comment on advice to anyone with this, and put you on the spot?
I think don't be scared of it. Don't be scared of it, but equally respect it, and don't kind of just think it's going to be simple and easy. It's going to take a bit of time to get set up, but looking at that long-term picture, it's a long-term hands-free strategy once you've got it set up.
I love that. Well, look, thanks again, Lisa. We really appreciate your time here, and yeah, look forward to catching up very soon. I will definitely start to shut everything down.
Thank you, Emma.
No worries. Thank you very much.